Constitution. It's one of the 6 ability scores that you put your stats into when making your character in Dungeons and Dragons. It is of my opinion that it is also the worst one. And the reason why I think this is because it's not really that useful. If you look at the set of skills, which are one of the main things that the stats you pick are affected by, not one of them are affected by Constitution. In fact, the only 2 things that most players are really going to have to think about that Constitution affects is concentration and hit points. Hit points being the thing that every character has to worry about. And concentration, really, your warlock or maybe another spellcaster. Personally, I don't take concentration spells that often. But the issue is that even though it just affects hit points, if you look at any character on D&D Beyond, just look at your characters that you've made, look at characters your friends have made, you'll probably see something that looks a bit like this. Your highest stat is going to be whatever's important to your character. I usually see Constitution as your 3rd or your 2nd, but Constitution, I almost never see Constitution go below the 3rd unless it's a joke character that's meant to die really quickly. And the problem with this is that Constitution doesn't really do anything. It doesn't do anything interesting, at least. But because it's tied to hit points, it makes it that you need it. Look at any other stat. You can have a low strength and still have a completely viable character. You can have a low intelligence and still have a completely viable character. A low wisdom, a charisma, a dexterity. There are ways around it where you don't really need that stat. Constitution is almost always needed by a character. Even if you make a high AC character, they're still going to want hit points, you know? Hit points are still nice because not everything is tied to AC. Sometimes an attack's going to require a wisdom saving throw. So, Constitution very rarely goes below that 3rd spot. I don't know if I've ever seen it in the 5th or 6th spot that wasn't, oh, this is a joke character, they're supposed to be really frail and possibly die. Now, what can be done about this? What's the solution to fixing Constitution? And if I'm being honest, nothing. There's not really anything that can be done. And it's because Constitution is just such an important piece of the game. To remove Constitution would make it a different game. And if we were to try to give Constitution something more to do, well, that gives it even more reason to be a more important stat and to make it better. And if you take away from Constitution, unless you remove its ties to hit points altogether, well, now it's going to be a bigger waste of points that you're putting into. If I wanted to play a different system other than D&D, I would just play a different system that's not D&D. I like D&D, mostly because it's the only thing that people who are new to TPRPGs are willing to play, but I also really like the game. So, if that's not the solution, then what is? And what I have noticed is that people who are just starting off in D&D often go to their DMs and say, hey, how should I make my character? Which is good. I like it when new players come up to me and ask me how to play D&D because obviously I love talking about it. But I notice I do this, and I've noticed other DMs do this, where we kind of don't explain why Constitution exists. We just explain it's important. Like, they'll say, oh, well, how should I put my stats? And we'll say, oh, so, well, you should make Constitution a high one because it's tied to your hit points. But we won't really explain. It's like, oh, yeah, well, if you do make a character that has a really high AC, you don't need as high of hit points. Or, oh, yeah, if you do make a character who is a wizard and can teleport out of dangerous situations, you probably also don't need a high Constitution. And that's something we should let players know. Not every character needs a lot of hit points, but we're scared of people who are brand new to the game showing up and dying in one hit because they had Constitution at an 8. But we shouldn't be, because if you're the DM, you do the rolls, you make the encounters. You can make the encounters less intimidating. Level 1 is only as intimidating because there's usually not a lot of enemies you can fight. So the things that you do fight are usually overleveled. A level 1 party can fairly safely take on a regular bear. A level 1 party can take on a whole bunch of small things. But what is an example of a character that doesn't need high Constitution? Yeah, I'm throwing out all these examples, but what does a character like that look like? Well, a character like that is a character I've built quite recently, before I even planned on making this video, is a lore, bard, rogue Githyanki. 3 levels of bard, 1 level of rogue, and I realized when making the character that Constitution should actually be their worst character. Not their worst character, their worst ability score. Because when you look at their skills and their proficiencies, this is what's important to this character. I chose this for a one-shot, and the idea is that I want them to have as many skills, as many abilities as possible. Or many proficiencies, not abilities. Sorry, I keep misspeaking. And due to the fact that Constitution doesn't tie into any skills, if I were to put more points into Constitution, it would make this character's gimmick actively worse. And this, maybe for a full game, this type of character wouldn't work. But most people's first experience with D&D is just a one-shot that never takes off, or a campaign that only lasts 1 or 2 sessions. So being afraid of your characters having low Constitution shouldn't be that big of a deal. In fact, having a low Constitution can be more fun because you could die at any time. If you roll a 6 when rolling for stats and you put that into your Constitution, you don't have to flavor your character as being of low Constitution. You can frame them as a normal character. However, when you play, you have to play in combat like a solid hit is going to take you down. And I feel like that's a lot more interesting than every character just deciding, oh, well, I'm going to put more into Constitution. Not because it makes sense for my character to have a good Constitution, but because I know mechanically they need a good Constitution. My real gripe with Constitution is not that it's not balanced. Any other skill you could argue is not balanced. Any other aspect of the game you can argue is not balanced. It's just not fun. Strength is fun. Being either very weak and not being able to lift things can be funny, but also being able to lift huge things can feel heroic. Dexterity, it feels heroic to be able to jump across rooftops and climb and be flexible and all that type of stuff. It's also funny if your character can't do those things. It's fun if your character knows a lot and can tell your other players lore. It's also fun if your character needs other players to tell them what shops are because they can't read. problem with Constitution is just that it's boring. You can't get anything out of that. Some DMs tie drinking to the Constitution, but that's going to come up like once every couple sessions in downtime, depending on your game. And even then, that's a house rule. And finally, thank you for watching the video. I realized I have a lot of fun doing this. I plan on doing more in the future. And if you want to see what else I do, you can click that subscribe button. I don't know how many more being critical of D&D videos I'm going to make, because in fact, I do really love D&D, and I feel like I have a lot more to say rather than being critical of this one part of a mechanic or that one part of a mechanic. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully you'll see my face in another video.